It's Friday morning in near Melbourne in Australia, so I'm in a different time zone to you all. But it's appropriate after talking about colic to then talk about feeding, because there's certainly relationships between it. And brood mares, especially lactating mares, are one of the horses that is at higher risk of colic. So nutrition, and I talk nutrition and feeding sort of interchangeably here, is vital for fertility and productivity. Horses are not selected for fertility, so there's many reasons why we don't have the same fertility we do in other animals, but nutrition is an important part of getting optimum fertility, and particularly with older subfertile horses that are valuable mares, getting them in foal, keeping them in foal. And then the big thing is the difference to the health and productivity or performance of that foal throughout its life. So I think probably the most important factor in terms of mare nutrition and fertility would be body condition and weight, and keeping mares in good condition rather than the sort of fat, rather than being fat, which is often what the mare owner wants. And I think that's the ideal approach. And so this term straight line nutrition, ideally they're not deviating too much throughout the year. For some breeders believe that flushing, which is getting your dry mares a little light and then putting weight on them, is beneficial. I really think it's only beneficial if they are light already, which is often what happens with maiden mares. So you certainly want to put weight on maiden mares, but you don't need to do that if you manage your older dry mares properly. So avoiding weight loss is obviously one of the key things, as well as avoiding excessive weight gain. So some of the consequences of underfeeding are there would be the mare loses weight, reduced fertility, particularly in a lactating mare. That's important. If it's significant enough, the foal is protected. The foal that she's feeding is protected to some degree, but if the weight loss is significant enough, if the calories reduction is significant, then you'll reduce the growth rate. If you underfeed minerals or protein, more developmental orthopedic disease, and you'll have lower values for young horses. So you may think overfeeding is good, but there's a lot of cost involved in overfeeding, particularly minerals and vitamins when they're overfed, but calories and protein too. So generally gain weight, you have more metabolic issues, we have more colic, we have more laminitis, and increased developmental orthopedic disease risk. So, and there are some long-term impacts on both the foal that the mare is feeding, and perhaps the pregnancy that she's carrying. I guess we don't always get a choice about whether we've got grass available, but it's the most useful feed for any horse, apart from a racehorse or a performance horse that's in a stable. But in a breeding sense, it's really incredibly useful. So a great source of energy, protein and amino acids, good source of omega-3 fatty acids, as distinct from omega-6s that we're getting from grain. We'll get lots of vitamins, A, E, K, and plenty of other antioxidants that we don't necessarily measure in a nutritional sense. This will certainly offer superior nutrition to processed forage such as hay and haylage. And one of the things is how, we don't see this unless we have a mare in a small yard, but how much a lactating mare can eat, what their appetite is, and how much grass they can grow through. And that is a major contributor to maintaining their body weight and at the same time satisfying their energy needs, dry matter needs. So the key thing you can do with judging energy supply or energy balance is by body condition or weight. And a mare who is losing weight will be in a negative energy balance or have disease processes that are there or contributing to that, or teeth problems, and in a positive energy balance, they'll obviously gain weight. I think there's a rationale for weighing mares in many situations, weighing lactating mares, because you will measure the drop in body weight before you can see it. And it's often it's a very busy time of the year. People are very busy. They're worried about getting the mare in foal, worried about the foal's legs, sick foals, etc. And so weighing mares is I think useful. If you can't weigh them, looking at body condition scoring and then adjusting the grain or the concentrate or the forage, depending on the results of change in body condition scores. A couple of body condition scoring systems, but you will all use the Texas A&M 1 to 9 system, and getting your farms and the managers and the staff on the farm familiar with this will be something that's very helpful for you in terms of keeping mares in the right sort of condition. And we're sort of probably wanting them in the 5 to 6 category, 7 at the top end. I guess there are some breeds that they tend to be 7 all the time, but we're not wanting to have them in getting too much, certainly below 4. So thin mares and, oh, excuse me, I've got body condition score less than 2. That would be in the Australian and English scale. So we'll go body condition score less than 4 on the Texas A&M scale. Have been found to have longer gestations. They start cycling later in the spring, don't cycle as regularly, and a lower pregnancy rate at different time periods. And certainly lower milk production in very thin mares, or if they're losing weight, and that's where weighing them either when the mare is in the crush for reproductive activities, or on a regular basis is useful in managing the mares and then managing the feeding of them appropriately. On the other hand, fat mares, have some negative factors as well. As I said, there's certainly no big effect on the size of the foal or the growth of the foal. You get more challenging foalings and more likely of post-foaling damage. So that's a factor with subsequent fertility. Certainly appear to get more flexural deformities and angular limb deformities in the foals. These mares have some inherent risks of laminitis, and the impacts on insulin sensitivity in the foal could then follow through to an increased risk of OCD. Some impacts about cholesterol immunoglobulin levels and immunity. So, we're not wanting to have, there's no big advantage in having mares fat. Now, are there disadvantages? Does it impair reproduction? So an English study looking at pregnant mares that were fed to be in good body condition score or fat. There was no difference in what happened at foaling, no difference in pregnancy rate, timing of ovulations after foaling, but the feed bill was twice as high. And in some cases, you've got risks of laminitis. Obviously, breed differences certainly have a big impact here. So some breeds are much easier to get overweight than others. Other studies looking at cyclical changes and some data suggesting lower endometrial health and more early embryonic loss. Now, interesting, there's been a little bit of data I guess you'll say preliminary studies from New Zealand looking at mares gaining weight and predisposition for more colts than fillies, and distinct mares losing weight, but that probably needs to be followed up with some more controlled work. Now, foal birth weight is an important consideration, a very important consideration, because that will influence the value of the foal and also the risks of developmental orthopedic disease. And it's related to lots of factors about the mares, the size of the mare and the stallion, what the placenta is, placental disease, age of the mare, and parity. But it's pretty much unrelated to the feeding of the mare. So this is some thoroughbred data that we've collected from looking at foal birth weights, and you can see that you get a significant reduction in your maiden mare, and then you're starting to get the biggest foals about the third and fourth foal. But there's not a massive difference between the second foaling and third to fourth. Now, very high birth weights can be detrimental, increased risk of dystocia, and then damage, post-foaling damage that makes the mare harder to get in foal. And so one study found that we've got big foals that greater than 62 kilos. We had a significantly lower or an almost significantly lower foaling rate than those that were less than 62 kilos. And in terms of thoroughbreds, we would think probably getting above 62, you've got an increased risk of stifle OCDs and hock OCD, but stifle is particularly important. More conformation abnormalities, more upright foals in that category, and angular limb deformities. On the other hand, the very low birth weight is something we want to avoid, and often this relates to disease or placentitis or other factors with the mare, and again, more angular limb deformities, and they're certainly lower value foals. And if they're thoroughbreds, unless they're from maiden mare, they're probably less likely to win a good race. Here's some data that we've collected from body weight and condition, and my colleague Clarissa Brown Douglas, and Joe Pagan connected body weight and condition of Kentucky mares, thoroughbred mares and foals, showing the effective season. And this is body condition score of the mares related to month of the year. And you can see that we get a significant increase in body condition, or a substantial increase in body condition from March through May, which is when the grass comes in. And these are the different lines represent different foaling months. But you get the advent of good grass and the ability of a mare to eat large amounts of that good grass, and the mares are putting on weight. So no matter when they fold, and that then has an influence on the what happens with the foal. So here's something looking at the weight gain of the foals. Foals born early in the year had lower weight gains as sort of average daily gain. We'd go between 1.5 to 2 kilos a day in the first month of life. And so the January and February foals, lower weight gains early in the year than your March and April foals. But then when you get out to 3 months of age, where the 2 is marked, then you're getting increased compensatory growth, because the mare's out on the mare and foal are out on the pasture, the foal's eating something, but the mare's milk production goes up, and those foals are gaining more weight. There are definitely some correlations between mare and foal body weight parameters. So foal body weight, body condition score, average daily gain correlate with what's happening with the same things in the mare. Heavier mares and fatter mares will produce both heavier and fatter foals, and there's some genetics, I guess, in body type there, but also perhaps in milk production. And fastest growing foals were from the mares that were gaining weight rather than losing weight. And in the mares foaling early in the season, or perhaps late in the season, if the grass dries off earlier, then they're losing weight after foaling, and foals didn't grow as fast. UK study looked at the influence of different feeding rates at weight gain during pregnancy, and these were so initial body condition score average was 4.6, so we had moderate and high feeding rates. And there was the mares were obviously the high feeding rate. The mares got fatter. The average went up to 7.8, and there was no difference in birth weight or placental weight, but there was an increase in the fetal fluids, and the placental area, but no difference in terms of the foal outcome. So no advantage in feeding high grain intakes. And this was with maidens, trying to look at increasing the size of maiden foals. Now, the same study actually, an interesting finding that they didn't anticipate in the hypothesis was about weight loss during pregnancy. And that's because half the mares got strangles in mid-pregnancy, and some of them had dramatic weight loss, up to 20%. And influences, that had a really negative impact on placental area and efficiency, and on foal length at birth and at weaning. That was sort of interesting. So, and in man, depending on if body weight loss occurs during pregnancy, depends when it occurs, what impact it has on one. Late gestation reduces birth weight, and mid gestation reduces length or height. But that was sort of interesting finding that, and it's not something that you see practically usually unless mares are sick. And this was a group of mares that were pretty sick and lost a massive amount of weight and a big impact on the foal. But generally, the fetus is very well protected during metabolism. So we have 3 stages of mare feeding, and the title was to talk about pregnant mares and lactating mares, but you've got to include dry mares in that as well, because they're trying to get pregnant. And the maiden is a special category of dry mare, but we've also got combinations of early pregnancy and lactation. So dry mares, poor condition, dry mares, and will have longer winter and estrus, and won't cycle as early in the spring. And flushing will certainly benefit some of these thin mares. And I think you get a real impact of pasture, but you do need to be particularly careful with maiden mares. And I'm talking probably thoroughbreds here, where, you know, they come off the track, they haven't adapted to being in a group. They've got a big reduction in their calorie intake from the concentrate feed, and so you need to look after these mares and feed them extra. Ideally, get them retired early and get some time with them to get them in the right sort of body condition that you want at the time of that you're trying to get them bred. So probably covered that slide. Yeah, small groups are preferred. And obviously horses that have got special needs, and I'll put, you know, windsuckers and cribbers in this category just because my picture it had a collar on. You know, they needed to be perhaps again need to be treated somewhat individually, even though depending on the environment as to whether you're running your mares in paddocks or running them and feeding them in stables. If they're advantage of feeding them in stables is that they can be fed individually, and you can ensure the mare that's at the bottom of the pecking order in a paddock feeding situation does get the amount of feed you want it to, whereas in the paddock you can't really do that, apart from you know, if you're feeding them in feed bins, having an extra feed bin, and the way you segregate the feed bins, having them in a circle rather than a straight line if you are doing paddock feeding, and that helps the mare at the bottom of the pecking order, that she doesn't necessarily get kicked off the feed and have to walk around to the other end. What happens during pregnancy? Most of the body weight change is during is sort of mid to late pregnancy, and that's when we start to think about changes in feed. So early pregnancy requirements are very close to maintenance, unless, of course, the mare's feeding the foal. And the key thing here is avoid overfeeding. So an early pregnant dry mare can be fed just the same, or a non-pregnant mare can fed just the same as she was before she was pregnant. Balanced ration is still important, and forage would be most of what she's needing. And very often, if you've got enough forage and the quality is good enough, then a balancer pellet supplying, you know, some protein, or amino acids, minerals, and vitamins, all we need. And often, if you're feeding a concentrate, lower intakes at the scale there. you don't want to be feeding higher intakes unless the forage is no good. So balancer pellet, there's many of them around, and they tend to have protein contents of 20 and 30% to cope with lower protein forages, and they're designed around low intakes and lower calorie intakes in particular. So they're generally lower energy and intakes of from 150 grams to a kilo a day. And of mares, you can use the balancer pellet with grains like oats to top up with extra energy if required, or you switch to a mare feed if necessary. Now, in the second half of pregnancy, we used to talk about trimesters, but I tend to think that the halves are really more appropriate. The energy needs, yes, go up as the foal grows, but it's only about 25% more than early pregnancy, and needs of other nutrients go up to a greater degree. Trace minerals are particularly important this time because milk's a relatively poor source of those trace minerals. So you want to sort of feed them to the mare, and then they're stored in the liver of the foal. Vitamin A and E important, and that's where if you've got green grass, that's a big help there. But we don't want to get, we want to again have this straight line nutrition. We don't want mares getting too fat, and we don't want, the body weight loss as I was suggesting before. Here's a study. This was my colleague Kathleen Crandall, who is speaking tomorrow, I think, PhD, showing the importance of the role of vitamin A in growth and development of the foal. So with Kathleen, we had 45 thoroughbred mares and foals in 3 groups, 30 of them on pasture and 15 in a dry lot, only fed hay, and they were fed a vitamin A-free concentrate. So vitamin A would be added to every commercial, or nearly every commercial concentrate, unless it's just a grain mix, a pure grain mix in different levels. And so foals were weighed at birth and every 2 months, and then looking at growth rate, and it showed a really long-term impact of vitamin A depletion. So where are we? We go. So sorry about the colours there. They're all a bit the same, but the first group is hay. So dry lot, just getting older hay, where the vitamin A levels expected to be much lower. The second one is pasture, and the third is adding the concentrate to the pasture. So no difference between the 2 pasture groups, but we've got, and this is in pounds, so American graph there, so about those who favour kilos like me. But anyway, the vitamin A treated foals were certainly had lower growth, and that was maintained through to 12 months of age. Okay, now that slide shows you the importance of vitamin A from forage, but there are some forages to avoid in brood mares, and the key one would be endophyte infested tall fescue, but also high endophyte ryegrasses can do some similar things through ergovaline. We worry a little bit about phytoestrogens in certain legume varieties and high levels of phytoestrogens. We're concerned about high nitrate forages and mouldy feeds and mouldy forages that might have a mycotoxin contaminant or high levels of mycotoxin, especially zearalenone. The other sort of end of the scale, and that's mostly quality issues, is that I'm a little concerned about feeding alfalfa ad lib to dry and pregnant mares, because they can do they can get fat very easily in that environment. So I would be preferring to avoid that. And if you had a choice of a hay, then a grass. If you have to feed hay, then a grass-based hay with some alfalfa is the better way to go. What about thyroid function and dysmaturity? There's some relationship to nutrition here, and that relates to iodine deficiency in excess or high nitrate forages, and also some goitrogenic activity in some plants, such as soybean meal or soybeans that haven't been cooked. And that can lead to these dismature foals, very long gestations, collapsed hocks, and goiter in the foals, or as well as foals that don't make it. So something you need to avoid. It's been mostly documented in Canada, interestingly. So that's not going to be an issue that you'll have to worry about in Mexico. In the last month before foaling, the foal's starting to get big, and mares don't eat as much. And that's probably just a sort of less space in the abdominal cavity. Gestability is reduced by 5% at that period, and there's not much of a body weight change in that period. But it's an important time to think about the quality of the feed and what you're going to feed them after foaling. So having the mare on acclimatized to the feeds that are going to be used after foaling at this time, I think is important, and but particularly avoiding fescue. The key factors in late pregnancy are adjusting the amount of concentrate you fed to the condition of the mares and what you have in terms of forage, in terms of quality and quantity. And often a balancer pellet is suitable if you've got enough good quality forage or a suitable concentrate. Trace minerals like copper, zinc, manganese are important. Vitamin E and selenium have both been shown to boost immunoglobulin levels and immune transfer, and vitamin A is helping growth. And vitamin K is probably important as well. And it's a time to think about omega-3 fatty acids, particularly with special needs mares, such as those with placentitis or prone to early embryonic loss. And they can come from green grass or fish oil. And I'll have some more about that later in the presentation. Now, when the mare foals, you've got major consequences of weight loss for reproductive efficiency, and if it's significant enough for the growth rate of the foal. So it's the time, whilst we don't want to overfeed the dry or early pregnant mare, we certainly don't want to underfeed the lactating mare, because we've got large increases in requirements for a number of nutrients, including macro minerals, energy, protein, and amino acid, and that's all about milk production. So here's just some data with the showing the changes in needs for energy, protein, and lysine at different stages of pregnancy or lactation. And here we have the late pregnancy, 25% increase in energy, 40% protein and lysine, and then we've got significant increases in those over late pregnancy, in early lactation, and if you look at that compared to early pregnancy with energy, we've got a doubling of energy requirements and more than doubling of protein and lysine requirements, and that's all about maintaining milk production. And it certainly seems that in some breeds, they're getting better at making milk. So mares are producing more milk, and foals are growing faster, and there are some consequences to that, but that's a fact of what we're dealing with as mares' genetic changes. The most challenging mares here are those foaling early or late in the season, which is really related to weather and forage availability. So winter or summer foaling mares may well need extra energy in their feed bin or in supplementary forages. So if there's no pasture to eat, certainly, and this can be, it's not something we see very often in Australia, this slide, but more likely the drought situation where there's no pasture availability. And then you need to be offering hay or haylage, so you need to offer forage first, and you certainly will need increased amounts of concentrates. Legumes, whilst I mentioned they may have, ad-lib legumes have some disadvantages during pregnancy, many advantages during lactating mare because they've got a higher energy, protein, and amino acid and calcium content. So that would be your alfalfa would be your number one go-to forage there. Milk production has been measured. The French have done the best thing about measuring milk production, but it can be up to 3% of body weight, and that's the fact. That's why mares have such a large increase in their energy and protein requirements. So it's a really challenging time because you're wanting the mare to have a foal, to be producing lots of milk, and you want them back in foal very soon on the first time you breed them. So you've got to work hard at maintaining both health and their condition through good feeding. Very often requires high concentrate intakes, and there is some data suggesting that higher NSC concentrates, so more starch and sugar there, will increase milk production. And so some work done looking at the influences of fat, higher fat feeds versus higher NSC feeds, and changes in milk production. It certainly can have some impact. There's obviously marked breed and individual differences in how much you have to feed, and many breeds need that are good doing breeds will need a lot less concentrates than say thoroughbreds might need. But sometimes lactating mares are needing 1 to 1.5% of their body weight. They may be in concentrate intake, so large amounts there. On the other hand, if you've got good pasture and good weather, then they may only need a balancer pellet. There's no definitive thing saying you have to feed concentrate to these mares. What happens in late lactation is interesting. Mares' requirements drop, but if the foal is and they drop because they're making less milk, but if the foal's sharing the feed bin, the foals are starting to eat a significant amount of feed. Now that may or may not be good, depending on how the foal is doing. And sometimes I think you want to avoid that if you've got a foal that's doing really well. But I tend to think in our situation, we tend to keep feeding them the same amount as you do in early lactation, even though what the mare specifically needs is lower. And that's because forage availability often reduces. And so it's all about what quality of forage is there. And it's the combination of the forage and the concentrate that's giving you the meeting total nutrient needs. If the mare's feed is similar to what the foal will eat, a similar form, not necessarily identical nutritionally, but of a similar form, what the foal will eat, you'll reduce the weaning setback in the foal by feeding that concentrate before weaning. And obviously after weaning, you cut the mare's feed back because that'll help dry that mare off faster. And then, they go on to a sort of dry or pregnant mare diet. We do want to avoid weight loss during lactation because, as I said, that's affecting reproductive efficiency and fertility, and that's a key factor there. I mean, mares are great at drawing on reserves to maintain milk production, but I think when they're starting to lose, say, more than 20 kilos a month, it's probably starting to get to be significant for foal growth rate. Now, you only know that by weighing the mare. At this time, added fat is a useful energy source, and oil or stabilized rice bran is useful, and ad-lib forage is required virtually. So either with grazing or with hay. And mares that are confined because the foal's sick or got leg issues, they particularly, you really need to be conscious of how much forage they're getting and the quality of the forage. Very large hay supply, because you've got a mare in a stable or a yard, they lose weight very quickly. And I think there's merit in weighing mares. And then we have this program, great program, GrowTac, which is used for reviewing and monitoring growth rates in young horses, and you can also use it for recording the weights of the mares and reviewing change in a graphical format. Now, concentrates for mares really depends upon what stage they are and their breed and the forage quality and quantity that you've got. So there's no one rule of thumb, or there's no, one. You read a bag of feed, and the hard part is writing something on the bag of feed, because we tend to write a range of intakes, but it's done often for the worst case situation. So you don't necessarily um, everyone doesn't necessarily have to follow the instructions on the bag, and it may be more appropriate to change to a different feed that's designed for lower feed intakes, such as the balancer pellet, if the forage quality there and the mares are a breed and a condition that's appropriate. You certainly want to look for one that's designed for mares, and very often professional nutrition advice will help you get the right feeding program. Now, what about the older mare? There are some challenges there, and uh, some of these relate to joints, to feet, to teeth, more metabolic conditions such as PPID. They have a general reduction in immunity. And so all of these things are leading towards some subfertility factors. And we've got DNA, probably more DNA abnormalities, more uterine damage. And so the older mare is going to be often need to be fed and managed a little differently. And you may do some special things. Now, the older mare that's starting to lose weight is then going to have more issues with oval conformations, and so that's going to be a disadvantage. They'll obviously have more uterine issues, uterine defence mechanisms, and more cervical damage, and so a greater risk of placentitis and lower conception rates and more early embryonic loss. So, generally speaking, less efficient. Now, it's an interesting looking at when a mare is aged, some data we have about average birth weight of foals and mare age. And it's not until, we're starting to get to 15 that that foal birth weights are starting to drop off. And so there's no, you can't say age at one. If foal birth weight is a measure of the efficiency of the mare's uterus in rearing the foal or the mare's system, then it's above 15 weeks starting to get a reduction in foal birth weight. And certainly mares between 10 and 14 have significantly higher birth weights. Now, teeth issues. Okay, so annual review of all mares' teeth, and therefore correction, and perhaps older mares with teeth problems or with conformation, molar conformation problems, as it were, then they might need twice a year. You're going to look at using digestible concentrates that are, say, pelleted, extruded, or processed grains, and digestible fibres such as high quality hay, or super fibres like bread pulp, soy hulls, or haylage. If the mare's having difficulty chewing hay, then chopped up hay, so chaff, or the super fibres have to come to the fore here. Chronic pain in either joints or feet are an issue affecting lots of older mares, but it's important to not get them too heavy, because that puts extra load on the joints and feet. Now, these mares will often have a reduced grazing time. They can't move around the paddock as much, so you've got to make the forage more accessible to them, and often have to increase the concentrate intake. These older mares have some thermoregulation issues, and horses are great at thermoregulating, and they often handle cold better than heat. But aged mares have got are more likely to lose weight in bad weather, and that relates to appropriate shelter, rugging if necessary. And the thing that warms horses up is hay. A bran mash doesn't warm them up; hay does. Warm bran mash is not the thing to do, but the waste heat from the hay will help them. As we keep breeding older mares, we're seeing more mares with metabolic issues and PPID, which will have an effect on fertility reduction. Pergolide, obviously commonly used, an effective treatment, but that has been shown to increase risk of reduced milk production. It won't be good for the foal, and may also risk prolonged gestation and inappropriate placental separation. So there's some negatives to pergolide, but there are some advantages too, and that's important to consider. So feeding mares with PPID really depends on what body condition score they are, and secondarily, if they've had laminitis, then you need to assess their insulin status, and so it's going to depend on the insulin dysregulation status. So the thin mare, you want a low glycemic index feed, so something with moderate NSC but added fat and fibre. It's great energy sources and plenty of digestible fibre. The fat, if the oil and stabilized rice bran in the feed then go up, then that will tend to lower the glycemic index. Mare's got insulin dysregulation. It's more a low NSC diet and perhaps higher in fat and fibre and a balancer pellet is the appropriate way to feed them. Now, several chronic diseases are going to lead to body condition score loss, and it's a matter of appropriately diagnosing them and looking at specialised diets. Now, what about putting weight on the old mare? What we need here, we need calories, not protein. And people often look at protein because that's the first thing on a feed tag, and they then are going, well, that's what I mostly need to worry about. So you're looking to moderate, high digestible energy feeds, and very often individual feeding, multiple meals a day rather than groups. And high-fat feeds are very useful in these circumstances, from either a high-fat commercial feed or adding oil or stabilised rice bran. Ad-lib high-quality forage is really important, and digestible fibre. Now, I'll start to talk a little bit about some special needs related to fertility and some micronutrients here. We've been talking mainly about energy, protein, lysine, etc., macronutrients. So antioxidants and mare fertility, and I think that's an important consideration, and one of the things that grass does a good job with vitamin E, but there are some other and vitamin A. And what we're wanting to do is think about older mares in terms of their antioxidant needs. And there's some work, data from I think New Zealand, suggesting diets supplemented with long-chain omega-3 fatty acids from DHA and EPA and antioxidants had improved oocyte functions and embryo development compared to using corn oil. Now, the first of those I mentioned is selenium. That's a key antioxidant, and areas of the world are selenium deficient, and in extreme conditions that can lead to white muscle disease, but also reduced immunity. And you also have areas with excessive amounts of selenium. It's the mineral that has the lowest range from requirements to toxicity. It is something that you can assess the status in the blood. Unlike most other nutrients, we can't do that, but many forages are low in selenium and many areas are low, so you need some supplementation. Some data about foal immunity. Mares supplemented with either 1 milligram or 3 milligrams per day led to increased IgG in the serum of the foal. So selenium will be added to most feeds and many supplements, and it's a matter of having a look at that and doing the calculations on selenium intake and knowing what's in the selenium of the forages in your area. Now, vitamin E's and antioxidants tends to work with selenium. I've mentioned high levels in green grass, but much lower levels in hay and dry grass. And supplementing the female with both vitamin E and selenium has been shown to have an impact, an antioxidant effect in the oviduct, in the uterus and the oviduct, and therefore improving fertility in that regard. Also impact on immunity in the foal, and this was a study done looking at feeding 1,600 IUs for 4 weeks before to 4 weeks after foaling, and increased IgG in the colostrum. If you are adding vitamin E, look at the form of vitamin E, because natural vitamin E will give you superior results to synthetic form. Coenzyme Q10 is another sort of, not a vitamin, but it's related to, I guess you say, paravitamin. And it's an important antioxidant and is starting to be used in stallion diets for fertility. And I think there's some rationale for using it in mare diets to combat oxidative stress that could be damaging to the sperm. I think the omega-3 fatty acids have great potential or great value in subfertile mares and in mares prone to placentitis, but also mares prone to early embryonic loss. So there's some nice data out there about improvement to biopsy scores, reduced post-breeding inflammation, changing gene expressions, faster involutions of the gravid horn, and then the key thing is getting more mares involved, higher per cycle pregnancy rates. So here's the really complicated slide at the end of the day that I don't expect you to take in too much, but it's omega-6 fatty acids in general terms are pro-inflammatory, and the omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. And what we're wanting is to increase levels of the two green marked ones, EPA and DHA. So they're the long chain forms that are anti-inflammatory. But to get them, you have to feed fish oil or have a situation where the mare has a lot of intake of the short-chain omega-3 fatty acids from green grass. The long-chain omega-3s are preferentially taken up by the placenta, have some impact on the placenta, improving nutrient supply to the fetus, improved immune competence in the fetus, and the anti-inflammatory effect is important. Different sources of these fatty acids are in oils or in some forages. So we have high omega-6 oils, are not the ones you want to feed if you're worried about omega-3 to 6 ratio, and that's corn oil, which is the most popular oil fed to horses in the world. On the other hand, we have the low omega-6 oils such as flax oil, which is becoming gaining some prominence, and then we have the high long chain oils, EPA and DHA, coming from fish oil. Intermediate would be, say, soybean, or we use canola. But if you want to increase levels of EPA and DHA, you need to use fish oil. So there's some work done at University of Florida and Colorado years ago, and we've done similar work looking at what happens. And here you can see in purple or blue, you've got the levels of EPA and DHA in red cells in the horses on the fish oil versus the ones on flax oil in red, where there was no change in those levels. So if you wanted to get an impact on omega-3 fatty acid status of the cells, you need fish oil to do that. So where you might use it, anti-inflammatory effects in mares that are prone to early embryonic loss or placentitis, and or if you want to change the fatty acid content of the milk. But it's really a special needs situation. Green grass is certainly having a useful effect. So I'll just mention briefly arginine. 1 minute to go, where there's some data out there. It's come from work in pigs about changes in uterine blood flow, reduced uterine fluid accumulation, embryo sizes, and one study looking at increased foal birth weight, which may or may not be good. But arginine, again, for special needs older mares may have some consideration. I'll reinforce the importance of grass if you've got that available, grass being Dr. Green, and now come to the end and summarise and say, well, what we want with mare nutrition and fertility, and to feed mares to keep them in straight line nutrition, so somewhere between 5 and 7,